Hello, hello. Welcome back to Loki's Librarian. If you are new here, welcome. I am your librarian, Katrina, and on Sundays I do this thing called Books and Booze where I review a book and mix up a cocktail. This month we are looking at political thought, thinking political adjacent, making this week's book Suicidal Empathy, Dying to be Kind by Gad Saad. The accompanying cocktail is a Stay Woke, which is 1 ounce of bourbon, 1 ounce Campari, 3/4 ounce Espresso coffee liqueur, and 1/4 ounce of Punt vermouth. So let's do this. So Gad Saad is one of my favorite sarcastic bards of the 21st century. And he's been screaming for at least a decade that the emperor is naked while all of the emperor's, courtiers are insisting that everything's just fine. Everything's fine. No, this is all totally normal. It's you guys who are weird for noticing the fact the emperor is naked. In this book, he just kind of lays it all on the line. And honestly, since I catch a lot of the same headlines and extremes that Dr. Saad does, there wasn't a whole lot in here that surprised me from that perspective. Like the things he reported, I'm like, yep, I remember that. Remember seeing that. Remember that headline, right? But he does lay out how he got here in 8 very easy to read chapters. All right, and starting with a good virtue gone bad. All right, where he says empathy is not a bad thing in and of itself, right? In fact, humanity evolved to be empathetic. It was one of our survival traits, right? That creation of empathy and an empathetic bond lets us work together as a society, okay? Not a bad thing at all. 3/4 ounces. Oh, almost out of this. I might have to go buy it. Well, and I have enough for today's cocktail, I'm sure. I have to eyeball the 3/4 ounces, so I can't eyeball and talk at the same time, apparently. So we're just gonna call that good. I'm gonna do the same thing with the Punt. So good virtue gone bad is his opening salvo, and in it, sadly, his outweighing empathy is a good thing. All right, it's an evolutionary adaptive trait that allowed mankind to evolve as a social species, and we are a highly social species. I mean, I am, and I hate basically everybody, but even I have friends. I'm very selective with my friends, but I do have them, and I do see them fairly regularly because humanity is a social species. We have to be. We have to see our friends. This is a stirred cocktail. So there it is, all right? But somewhere along the way, empathy has maladapted into what Saad calls empathy-related disorders. And these include psychopathy, all right? That's very obviously the one that most people are going to think of. Narcissistic personality disorders, borderline personality disorders. All of these are maladaptations of empathy, okay? He, of course, references the most famous of Hollywood maladapts, Hannibal Lecter, as well as compassion fatigue, which is what happens to people who work in helping professions like nursing, teaching, being a doctor. All of this can lead to, empathy fatigue, where you're like, fuck this, I just don't care anymore. And they burn out. All of which leads to the central thesis of the book, Suicidal Empathy. Let me stir this up. Pour this. And you get a lemon zest for garnish. And since I actually still have a lemon, I'm going to do the lemon zest garnish. It helps if I don't stab myself, though. I am going to stab myself. I just know it. My husband's going to look at me like I did that on purpose to not have to go to the barbecue today, which would be not true because I actually like the people we're seeing today. Because, hey, social species. It's important to have friends. Just the zest. Express, drop in. All right. Cocktail's ready to go. Where was I? Suicidal empathy. Examples of suicidal empathy abound in today's media, if you're actually looking for it. Actually, I shouldn't say it abounds in today's media because certain aspects of the media are shit and they're not reporting on this stuff. We find out about it through, the people who posted on X, hey, this shit just happened in my hometown, where then, of course, it could be conveniently dismissed as anecdotal evidence. But is it really? If it's trending that hard, is it really that anecdotal? Okay, examples. Women are raped, but the rapist is allowed to go free because they are refugees who don't know any better. See a lot of those headlines coming out of Europe. See some of them coming out of the United States, too, but a lot of them are coming out of Europe. That's suicidal empathy, letting the rapist go because they don't know any better. When people are more outraged at Nick Shirley than they are about the fraud he uncovered because it was Somali refugees committing the fraud, that's suicidal empathy. I'm not quite sure what to make of that. I mean, it's a little harsh. It's a little harsh, but it actually has a fairly smooth rollover in the end there. That's not too bad. All right. All right. Kind of as a side note to that, when I was reading Ayaan Hirsi Ali's book a couple of months earlier, Infidel, right? Was that the one I read? She spells out point blank that Somalis committing fraud against the government is literally a way of life, refugee or not. I mean, they commit as much fraud in Somalia as they do here. It just pays better here, right? Somalia doesn't have the billions of dollars to throw at empathetic causes that America does. But this is not a refugee thing. It's a Somali thing. I saw an X stream earlier today where somebody was comparing like Japan to Somalia, and Somalia has like 72 out of 100 on a corruption scale, whereas Japan is like a 2 out of 100 or something like that. So it's a way of life, and they're bringing it here to America, and then, when they get caught doing it. Anyways, back to this book. The next chapter is Forbidden Knowledge. This is the things that are known to be true, but you're prohibited from saying them out loud. Like, for example, there are only 2 genders, that trans women are men and woman face. If a trans woman dies alone in the middle of the desert and their body is found in 50 years, nothing more than bones, the forensic pathologist is going to look at their skeleton and say something like Caucasian male, approximately 25 to 35 years old, for example. Or African male, Chinese male. They can actually tell from different bone structures what your ethnicity is and your gender. 2 things you really can't change down to the bone, man. No amount of surgery, estrogen supplements can change your bone structure or the DNA in those bones. Like if they only find a tooth and they decide to extract DNA from the tooth to figure it out, it's going to return that you're a male and what your genetic markers are. I'm sure that's going to send some of you all into spirals, but there it is. So that's forbidden knowledge. All right, acknowledging the things that are true, but we're not supposed to know anymore. He talks about linguistic empathy in this chapter, how language has been literally changed so the speaker appears more empathetic. It's no longer secretary, it's an administrative assistant. It's not janitor, it's a custodial engineer. It's not a birth defect, it's congenital disability. It's not illegal immigrant, it's undocumented immigrant, or in the country improperly. Not nice and polite. He then takes us to its absurd logical conclusion, refers to immigrant rapists in the book as undocumented lovemakers. Because, hey, not really rape if they're just, letting them go, right? I mean, the woman's case wasn't that strong. The rape didn't last long enough. I think that was somebody in Sweden who was told it didn't last long enough for us to have to deport this guy. How long does it have to last, right? And it kills me. The same people who 10 years ago were justifiably outraged that Brock Turner was sentenced to a mere 6 months in county jail and 3 years probation excuse the rape when the rapist is an immigrant. Excuse me, is an undocumented lovemaker. Cultural theory of mind is the next chapter, and it's exactly that. It's a theory that the mind is a product of cultural and linguistic evolution, meaning where you grew up and your genetic background. There is some truth to that, right? You're a product of your culture and how you grew up, the language that is used around you when you're growing up. If the language you're hearing when you're growing up says that all women are basically useless and that men can do everything and women should just be silent and be property in the background, that's going to impact you. It takes a very, very strong mind to break that linguistic programming. I'm floored that this is even up for debate, but apparently it is. I mean, we all know that humanity is heterogeneous. I mean, we're not a homogeneous species, all right? We're all human. There is that. But their catchphrase, our diversity is our strength, right? And it's well known that not everyone is alike. We're all human, but people who grow up in Japan are wildly different from people who grow up in Poland, who are different from people who grow up in Dubai, Somalia, Argentina, America. Where you grow up makes a difference. Not all cultures are equal. Some are, in fact, better than others. And yet, people think that opening the borders and letting all refugees flood across, and that's just a matter of getting them to assimilate. Right. The problem here is that not every refugee wants to assimilate. And I would actually refer you again to Ayaan Hirsi Ali's book. She was the rare gem who actively sought to improve her own life. Most refugees take the dole and then demand society that they move to accommodate them. And Hirsi Ali actually reported in her book that when she first started trying to improve her lot in the Netherlands, the counselors at the refugee camp encourage her to stay in the camp and just take the money. Like, no, just stay in the camp. You don't need to go out and get a job. You'll get more money just taking the dole than you will getting a job. They were not, in fact, trying to help her assimilate, even though she wanted to. She had to go out and seek assimilation on her own. She did. Absolutely floored by that woman's intelligence. God, how many languages does she speak? Like 5 or 6? She's smart in like 6 languages. I'm semi-smart in 1. Yeah, not all cultures are equal. Cultural relativism is the back door through which suicidal empathy slides. And the same people who are outraged about Epstein's Island turn a blind eye to the child brides of Islam because that's just their religion. All right? Epstein did it because he was, he was a bad man and Jewish, obviously, right? Islam does it because it's their religion. Cultures are not equal. And sorry, but the West is the best. And Japan. I have a love affair with Japan's hardline stance these days. I respect it tremendously. Blank Slate Felons addresses the incredibly light sentences being handed out to immigrant criminals in the name of empathy, turning a blind eye to Adam Smith, who wrote in The Theory of Moral Sentiments, "Mercy to the guilty is cruelty to the innocent." Let that float for a second there. All right? The innocent people here, the ones who are being, sexually assaulted and raped and attacked and made to share their spaces with big violent men. He addresses the guy in California, the trans woman in California, who, insisted they were trans and so were sent to a women's prison where they raped two or three inmates, two or three of the female inmates. Yes. Go on, go see Dad, impregnating one of them. But, he's a woman. Would defy anybody who's, capable of biological reality to explain how a woman gets another woman pregnant. Smith wrote The Wealth of Nations, so he's considered the father of capitalism. It's not really any surprise that his other wisdom is routinely ignored by the suicidally empathic. Settled Science, Taboo Trade-Offs addresses how frequently, quote, settled science is wrong, addressing the madness of the COVID-19 pandemic and climate activism, which has mysteriously vanished now that large corporations want to build data centers everywhere. Isn't that weird? He addresses the tragedy of the commons in a roundabout way, discussing how the brain trust at the World Economic Forum thinks that none of us should own cars or property, and we should be thankful in our poverty for the good of the planet. Travel should be reserved apparently for refugees and Hollywood elites who know better than all of us how we should live our lives. And how the fear of being called a bigot leads to more tragedy, more unwanted lovemaking, more crime, more criminals allowed to go free. Because, they don't know any better. And these are the same people who say, just teach men not to rape. Like, they don't know it's a bad thing. They mean, don't teach white men not to rape. Everybody else gets a pass, apparently. I mean, hell, if you want a real recent example of suicidal empathy, on May 7th of this year in New York somewhere, we had Ramel Burke shove Ross Falzone, who's a 76-year-old retired teacher, down a subway stairs. Mr. Falzone died. Burke had previously attacked a 23-year-old woman like a month earlier on a subway. She declined to press charges because, and I quote, "Maybe a part of me was like, I don't want to put another black man in jail." End quote. That's the suicidally empathic, leading to a death of an innocent human being because she just didn't want to put another black man in jail. Never mind that that black man was a violent offender. Selling indulgences is much like how the Catholic Church used to sell indulgences for your sins. You could literally buy forgiveness for everything from lustful thoughts to murder. I think the only thing you couldn't buy forgiveness for is suicide because, well, you can't exactly ask for forgiveness after you're dead, right? I feel like there's a correlation there. Suicidal empathy, can't ask forgiveness for suicide. Yeah, there you go. That tracks. Mandatory training in empathy is becoming the indulgence you can buy, right? It's common across corporate America and in universities. It's de rigueur for the DIE cult, diversity, inclusion, and equity, the DIE cult, accurately. That's a more accurate acronym than how they like to say. They like to say DEI. No, it's a DIE cult. You're going to die if you join it. Saad covered that in full in his previous book, The Parasitic Mind. Excellent read. If you haven't read it yet, highly recommend it. Universities get around their inclusion requirements by narrowly defining who is to be included. Like, technically, legally, they can't say, we're not going to hire white men. So they just say, well, no, we're limiting who can be included in this to things like this is a position that was open for, quote, all areas of artificial intelligence. The call is open only to qualified individuals who self-identify as women, transgender, gender fluid, non-binary, or two-spirit. I mean, if I see that and I'm a dude, I'm a white dude, I 100% self-identify as a woman, not as transgender. I'm going full South Park.
I can't tell you how free I feel now that I've started identifying as a woman.
I am horrified to see what the next generation of medical doctors will produce with all of this. And I am not in the least bit surprised that the Back to the Land people are also growing their own herb gardens and exploring home apothecary options. When you know what's coming down the pipe in 20 years for medical care, yeah, I too am interested in growing my own herb garden and rediscovering Dioscorides. Govern Me Harder, Daddy. I love this chapter because I love the tongue-in-cheek, like, yes, give it to me, Daddy, very, very hard, spank me hard, right? It opens with a very, very famous C.S. Lewis quote. Of all the tyrannies, a tyranny sincerely exercised for the good of its victims may be the most oppressive. It may be better to live under robber barons than the omnipotent moral busybodies. The robber baron's cruelty may sometimes sleep, his cupidity may at some point be satiated. But those who torment us for our own good will torment us without end, for they do so with the approval of their own conscience. Such a good quote. Literally, that basically sums up the chapter, but he goes into detail, right? He talks about the outrageous wastefulness of the government in spending our tax dollars and how for a few brief shining days at the beginning of Trump's second term, there was DOGE, Department of Government Efficiency, which slashed through huge swaths of government waste. And that brief window of time is the only time in my 15 years of my current job the VA has responded to me in something even remotely approaching a timely fashion. I'm actually scared they might lose their jobs. And yet those who preach empathy are all too willing to give the government more and more of our money. And taxation is theft. And our idiot forefathers authorized it with whole cloth when they passed the 16th Amendment. Man, it has been downhill ever since. 16th and 17th Amendments should both be repealed, man. And he does talk about the benefits of free health care. Note the quotes, nothing free is actually free. Someone has to pay for it. And if it's not you, then you're the product. Just remember all those free COVID vaccines, guys. But not all is lost. In his final chapter, Inoculation Against Suicidal Empathy, Saad lays out a pathway forward. It's not a catch-all solution, mostly because those who already agree with Saad are at least partially inoculated already. And those who don't agree with him are likely to never read this book, which is a shame. They should read this book, if for no other reason than to broaden their own horizons. But the good news is, and this is very good news, he is now the #1 sold book on New York Times. And this was not a book the New York Times picked. He's there because his book is actually selling. One of those rare birds who actually managed to escape the leftist net and make it out there without the New York Times blessing. He just did it all on his own. And the New York Times, some last bastion of honesty, hangs in there and is like, well, he is the #1 seller, so we got to make him #1. Well done, Dr. Saad. I always like Gad Saad's books. He is an excellent author. I appreciate his wit and sarcasm. I think I said it when I read The Parasitic Mind, right? That if this were 1,500 years ago in an Irish court, he would be one of the protected bard classes who's allowed to say the truth no matter what, because he does it with elegance and wit and supreme sarcasm. Undocumented lovemakers, long may they not reign. The cocktail's not bad. I did it tongue-in-cheek as a nod to his own sarcasm. Don't stay woke. Going woke will, in fact, destroy your life in some fashion. This book was no exception. I appreciate his wit and sarcasm, and this book was no exception. I highly recommend it if you want an understanding of how the once greatest nations are collapsing in real time while we all watch, sidelined by those who would torture us without end, providing mercy to the guilty, while we all suffer for their empathetic tendencies. And that is it for this week. If you liked what you saw, don't forget to subscribe, and I will see you guys next Sunday. Bye.